we're going to jump right into it. We have a lot to do today, and I know you don't feel this way, but probably not enough time to do it. So we're going to go as quickly as we can, at least to begin with. To begin with, hopefully, you've read the poem, and you've read it at least somewhat recently, so you have some idea of what we're talking about. I'm of two minds. It's short enough. I guess we'll read it real quick. It's good to kind of get it in the air, as my old professors would say, and then we'll start actually talking about it. Some of you are making moves to do this. This is good. Go ahead and pull it up. Most of that will be virtually, I assume. I'll say this to you too. At this stage in the process, especially after today's class, at some point you got to do a little bit of self-scouting, right? As a student, like for me, and I'm older than you, I got to print it out. I can't do this screen thing. It just doesn't. It doesn't get into my brain in the same way. So I got to have it printed out for me. I also take notes as we talk on the printed out copy. Like that's just how my head works. Most of you are probably not that way, but if you are, do yourself a favor next time, print it out or something, right? Just be thinking about that. What's your name is?
Gabby, or Gabrielle.
Sweet, that answered both of my questions. I appreciate it. All right, anyway, as you guys get the poem up, I will read it for us. Little boy. The sun lowers on our backyard in Kansas, and I'm looking up through the circling spokes of a bicycle, asking my father as mindlessly as I would ask if he ever saw DiMaggio or Mantle, why we dropped the bomb on those two towns in Japan. And his face goes all wooden, the eyes freezing like rabbits in headlights, the palm of his hand slowly tapping the arm of the lawn chair that has appeared in family photographs since 1945. The shadow of my mother thrown across it, the green Packard in the background, which my father said he bought because after Saipan and Tinian and Okinawa, I felt like they owed it to me. These were names I didn't know, islands distant as planets, anonymous. Where is Saipan? Where is Okinawa? Where's the Pacific? Could you see the cloud in the air like the smoke from Eugene Messenbaum's semi? That huge cloud when he rolled it out on the Highway 54 last winter? The hand is hammering the chair arm, beating it. And I know it's all wrong as I move backward on the garage floor and watch his eyes watching the sun and its evening burial and the spreading silver light and the darkness over the farms and vast flat fields, which I will grow so tired of, so weary of years later that I will leave. Watching then as I do now his eyes as they take in the falling rag of the sun, a level stare, a gaze that asks nothing and gives nothing. The sun burning itself to ashes constantly, the orange maize blackening in drought and waste, and he can do nothing, and neither can I. All right. Relatively quickly, considering what we've done thus far, I want to take those first two steps that we've done in our previous two classes, which is we're going to summarize the poem, just plot stuff. Then we're going to explicate the poem, just like we did last time. And then the bulk of what we do, hopefully, is going to be some actual analysis today. We're going to actually talk about this like we would in a paper. Okay? So to begin with, if you had to sum this poem up in like 2 sentences, what is it about?
Kid asking his dad about World War II stuff.
We can get a little more specific, right?
Yeah, dropping the bomb in Japan.
What kind of bomb?
Nuclear bomb.
The atomic bomb. Oh. What's your name, miss?
Rory.
Is that what you go by?
Yeah.
Sweet. All right. Yeah. Early in the poem, how many lines deep? 5, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines deep. A little boy, we get that from the title, asks his dad, hey, why did we kill all those fucking people? Right? Like that. And I know we talked about curse, but it's that kind of air. Like a big part of the poem, I'm gonna try to save us some time, is that the boy doesn't understand the kind of question he's asking, right? That's a heavy question. And if you didn't know, you get that from the dad's reaction. The dad doesn't say anything to the boy. He never answers that question in the poem. He's like tapping the chair and he's staring off and he's just like, you almost see the wheels turning. Like, what am I supposed to say to that? Right? And the kid is just like, so you know, why do we do that, Pops? Like he's just, and that's kind of the whole poem, for the most part. Son asks a heavy question. Dad struggles to put into any kind of, like, what would you say to that, right? To a little boy. How would you, we see the socio-political ramification, like you can't, you know. So he's kind of stuck. And then toward the end of the poem, we go somewhere. And I want to kind of leave it vague because I want to see if you guys can do this. About 2/3 of the way down, the hand is hammering the chair arm. By the way, that from there all the way to the end of the poem is one sentence. That's a single sentence. The poem itself is only 3 or 4 sentences. Anyway, so that's clearly in the scene. The hand is hammering the chair arm, beating it. I know it's all wrong, right? About halfway through there, though, we move somewhere. And if you have to reread the section real quick or skim it, go for it. Where else do we go? We go somewhere here, very quickly. We don't stay in Kansas. To assist us a little bit, I'll read this last section. Just try to roll with me this time. The hand is hammering the chair arm, beating it. And I know it's all wrong as I move backward on the garage floor and watch his eyes watching the sun in its evening burial and the spreading silver light, and then darkness over the farms and vast flat fields, which I will grow so tired of, so weary of years later, that I will leave, watching then as I do now his eyes as they take in the falling rag of the sun, a level stare, a gaze that asks nothing and gives nothing, the sun burning itself to ashes constantly, the orange maize blackening in drought and waste, and he can do nothing, and neither can I. It's kind of quick. Where else do we go here? There's bombing imagery, which we can talk about in a second, but no. Talk to me about these vast flat fields. He says he will grow tired of them, weary of them. When? What is will? What kind of tense is that? Future tense. He's going to grow weary years later that he will what? Leave. What? What's the future tense about here? What does that do? What does that tell you about the speaker in this moment? We briefly covered this last time. The reason it's called a speaker, there are numerous, but to boil it down for you, the best way I can think to characterize it, it's a guy, me, okay? I'm talking to you. I know I'm saying I'm reading the poem to a room, but it's more intimate than that. I'm having a conversation with you, one-sided. I'm talking to you. Sorry to single you out. But I'm speaking to you. And when I say, I will grow so tired of, so weary of years later that I will leave, what does the speaker look like? How do you picture him?
A little boy.
Initially, yes. How do these lines change that? Little boy can't know what he's going to do in the future. That's how time works. Who's actually saying this?
The dad.
It's not the dad. I appreciate the attempt. It is the boy, but there's
Him in the future.
it's an adult looking back on when he was a boy, and he asked this kind of messed up question. As a boy, you didn't realize that. That's pretty standard. You do all kinds of stuff when you're a kid. You have no idea what you're doing. But if you ever reflect upon that, when you're older, you have some experience, some knowledge, all of a sudden it might strike you like, oh, that was a messed up thing to ask my dad, actually, right? That's what's going on here. That could be important. And again, I want to highlight it for you because it is quick. It's very easy to miss in this poem. But we go future tense real fast right at the end. That tells you the speaker of this poem. And by the way, this doesn't sound like a little boy. Little boys don't speak like this. It's an adult. About your age, about mine, somewhere in there. It's an adult. Looking back on when they were a kid, and they asked this. Okay, that's our summary. We know what the speaker actually looks like now. We know what happens literally in the poem. We know at some point they're going to leave all this behind. Kansas, what it represents, their father, they're going to go for reasons that they give us. And then the poem kind of ends in a weird way, which we'll talk about. All right. I'm officially out of water because I brought that little mug I'm pissed about. Explicating the poem. And again, we're going to do this much quicker than we have. If you had to pick 2, 3, 4 lines in the poem that strike you as important, significant, what stands out to you? What are some of the lines you're like, it'd be hard to talk about this poem and not talk about these lines, right? Any at all?
The father said, I feel like they owed it to me.
That's pretty interesting. I have thoughts on that. I'd love to hear yours first. Why?
Why?
Why do you think so? Why do you think that line's important?
Because who is he?
Huh? Like who's the dad?
Yeah, for somebody to owe him.
Okay. I think I follow you. All right. Well, there's even lower hanging fruit than that. That's the only time the dad speaks.
Yeah.
It's the only thing he says. In a poem that's all about how he won't answer the boy, we do hear from him. So that's kind of all we can know about that character, right? He says he felt like they owed it to me, meaning that Packard. We all know what that is, right? Because even if we didn't know what it was, we looked it up, right? Most of you aren't nodding. What's a Packard? A car. This is back in the day, right? Packards don't exist anymore, you know. Kind of luxury-ish, like a nicer car, right? He says, I felt like they owed it to me. After Saipan and Tinian and Okinawa, what does that mean? This guy a travel agent? What
World War II vet.
specifically in the Pacific
Yes.
Theater, because those are famous battles in the Pacific Theater of World War II. Okay? So you get the impression he was at those battles, probably participated, a soldier of some kind, right? Okay. Now all of a sudden that question about why did we bomb those towns in Japan takes on a little more meaning. Yeah?
It's personal.
To a degree, yeah. Yeah. And it also may help explain a little bit why the boy asks his dad. He's like, hey, you were around, right? Like, so you tell why? You know, I'm just curious. Yeah, for sure. Okay, good. Now, we still got to solve that line, though, real quick. I felt like they owed it to me after Tinian and Saipan and Okinawa. I think I'm doing that right. Anyway, I felt like they owed it to me. He's talking about that car. After those battles, they owed me that car. Who's they, do you think?
The Japanese.
I think it's the army.
How's he getting that Packard? Yeah. He got a check from the government for his service. And he went and bought himself that car. I'm of a mind he's talking about the U.S. government. Right? Which again is interesting. I always love pointing this out to you guys. How does the boy ask the question? Somebody read it for us. It's just a line. How's he say it?
Why we dropped those bombs in those 2 towns in Japan?
Why did we drop those bombs on those 2 towns in Japan? That's all of us. You know, you remember when you signed up to bomb Japan? You remember? You were there, right? You remember? They asked you? Dad says they owed it to me. That's not we. That's, you could argue, even a little bit adversarial. Yeah, I had to do some shit and they owed it to me, he says. In a way, that's kind of a response, unintentionally perhaps, to the boy's question. He's like, hey son, you're talking all this we business. Nobody came and checked with me. It was they. They made that call. It's interesting. We can't know that. He may have volunteered, and if he didn't, he damn sure would have gotten drafted, right? So it's kind of, but yes, even that, all of a sudden now, and this is skipping ahead a little bit, but I don't mind it at all. I'm going to talk more about why I'm writing this up here in a second. But one of the big themes or concerns in this poem is question of choice. When the boy asks, why did we drop those bombs? He's asking, why did we choose to drop those bombs, right? And the dad, the only language you get from him, seems to indicate he didn't have much choice about anything. They owed it to me. The one choice that dad makes in this poem that you can prove is he bought that car. That's it. Everything else, I'm going to go ahead and tell you it's up for debate. But one of the big themes and concerns in this poem is choice. And there's more to that, but again, I'm going to talk about this in a second. This is skipping ahead. All right, cool. So already, too, we haven't gone enough as far down the rabbit hole as we can, but just from that line, I agree, it's a very important line. We got some momentum now, right? Cool. Any other lines that strike you guys as, this is pretty important? It'd be hard to talk about this poem and not talk about this line or two or whatever. Yeah.
That I will grow so tired, so weary of these vast fields that when I grow older I'll leave.
Yeah. Why? Why do you think so?
It kind of ties into the theme of like choice. It's like he's choosing to leave.
Maybe. Maybe. More on that in a moment as well. It certainly sounds like he chooses to, I suppose. Although to phrase it as he does in the future tense makes it sound almost like prophecy. Do you know what I mean? In a weird way. But at the very, it's part of this discussion. I like that, right? Notice too, by the way, as soon as you find a cool line and you think about it for 5 minutes like we did, chances are very good you can think about other related material and you can do similar work, right? Related work. That's how papers are made. Yeah, I don't want to go too far with that now because I hate it that this class is structured this way, but there's going to be a big thing we're going to talk about later, and we have to do some work before that. But yes, in a way you're right, but in another way you're maybe not. That's okay. I got to be careful. I just read those evals, man. People don't like when I tell them they're wrong. So.
You're okay.
You say that now. Anyway, cool. Any other lines? I just want to get a couple out here, right? We're just kind of trying to make sure they're at the forefront of everybody's mind. Yes, ma'am.
And he says he can do nothing and neither can I.
Why do you point out to that? That sentence didn't make sense, but you get it.
Yeah, like what does that mean? Like you just said that you were leaving like a bit earlier, and
Yeah.
now you're saying you can do nothing. Like
See that? Yes, that's part of the conversation about the line that you noted, which again, we're just kind of building off each other. He says, I will grow so tired of, so weary of, that I will leave. And then 5, 6 lines later, whatever it is, he can do nothing, meaning the Father, and neither can I. And now it's like, if you were to talk about this in this poem, you'd have to talk about that last line, because that suggests.
Is that like a draft thing?
That could be part of it. And again, if we have time, we'll go down that rabbit hole. But everything you guys have named thus far, draft among them, is part of that conversation. But it's interesting too, the last line of the poem, everything we said. Why do we drop those bombs? We go through all that, fast, flat, all this stuff. At the very end, he can do nothing and neither can I. It doesn't sound like the speaker thinks there's much of this going around at all, which is very interesting. Cool. Just for the sake of putting it out there, we kind of talked about this line, but nobody named it, so I just want to make sure. The boy's question is pretty important too, right? Like the poem wouldn't exist without that line. That is what the poem is about. Is the speaker looking back, thinking about the one time he asked this question of his father that he kind of realizes now maybe he shouldn't have, right? So that line's probably pretty important too. All right. Now what we're going to try to do with the rest of class is see if we can perform any kind of analysis. And I think we can. And there's 2 ways to go about it, generally, okay? The first is what we've kind of tiptoed into thus far, and it's the way I do it, okay? But I recognize other people do it different ways, so I'm going to give you the other one too, okay? The way I've always done it, because this is how my head works, I focus on specific lines, just like we started to do, okay? And I'll write them in a paper, and I'll just kind of pick out details that I think are interesting or significant or what have you, and what that might mean. And you just build and build on that until you find an idea, you find an argument, okay? That's what we've been doing thus far. That's kind of what your homework again is trying to tiptoe you into thus far. And we'll do a little bit of that later. other way to do it that we have not talked about yet, that we will talk about now, is to think about the text globally. Okay? That just means taking the whole thing on, just you look at the whole thing if that's possible. And this is the shortest poem, so I think we can. Okay? And that brings me to this. Major themes or concerns or ideas represented in the work. A stronger way to put it might be like, why is the speaker telling you what he's telling you, right? Oftentimes, we tell on ourselves without meaning to, right? Like there's, think back to Old Men Playing Basketball. That poem is all about old men playing basketball. But as soon as you really focus in on that one question, you go back and look at the whole poem, you realize, oh, this speaker's got some concerns. He's got some things that are on his mind. But he didn't even realize it, right? And that's kind of what the whole poem's about. That's looking at it globally. Here, I think, one big question throughout the poem is choice. Who has it and when? Maybe why? What does that mean? You could write a whole paper on this poem about choice. You could. There's a couple other major themes or concerns in this poem, though. And I just want to see if we could pick some of them out real quick. Because some people prefer to work this way when it comes to a text. Okay? So, other than choice, which again, absolutely, throughout the poem. Okay? Can you guys identify any other, like, I mean, you guys know what a theme is, right? This is like senior lit stuff or whatever. You had flashcards, you had a trifold poster, somebody petted your head. What's a theme in a work? Yes, ma'am.
I think relationships, like particularly like familiar relationships, because it's between like a father and a son.
Well, I was gonna say you did it all yourself. We got to get as specific as we can.
Oh, a father and son.
Father and son relationship in this case, right? For sure. And again, it's kind of weird to think about like that, but we have narratives around all of this, right? You kind of have an image of what a father is to a son and vice versa and how they work. So much so that when it doesn't fit that narrative, you know, right? Yeah, that's absolutely going on here, for sure. Okay. Is there anything else? Again, any other just big picture concerns or ideas that are kicking around in this poem? There's at least one more that I think is pretty apparent. Yes, ma'am.
This might be out of the box, but like, is war okay?
Is war okay? Oh, I misunderstood you for a second. Two things. One, yes. War is absolutely a big concern in this poem. The father was obviously a soldier of some kind. We don't really know what branch, although given those battles, it seems likely he was maybe a Marine, but other branches were at those places. You guys don't care. War is a big concern, a big theme. And one of the ways you might talk about that theme is this question of whether or not it's okay. Maybe. But I would leave it a little bit more general in our list, because there's other ways you could take that question. You could take that theme, right? But sure. Yes?
I say self-entitlement.
I didn't hear you, I'm sorry.
Self-entitlement.
Why?
Because, like, I feel like he like, the government, like, owes him. Like,
Oh, the father.
Yeah, the father and the son. He's entitled to that question, and then the father is entitled to that money.
Okay. So just to make sure I follow you, so you're saying, all right, correct me if I'm wrong, because I want to make sure I'm following your train of thought. So you're saying the father is entitled to the money because he performed a job, right? Like, the son is entitled to this question that he asks of his father.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Like, why do you think that?
Because, to me, I don't know why he asked the question.
Nobody knows why little people do anything. They don't even know. Look, in the poem he says, I ask as mindlessly as I would ask if he ever saw DiMaggio or Mantle. Those are famous baseball players, by the way. It just popped into his head. It just popped into his head. ultimately, right? Little people do these things. That's how you learn about the world, by the way. You enter knowing nothing, and you just ask random things. Most of them don't matter, but some of them do. And yeah. But I think to help you a little bit, I think we all kind of agree that the son is entitled to that question. Why? Why is that question more than okay for the son to ask, really?
Because he knows about it.
He knows a little bit. Well, wait, who's he?
The son.
Okay. Oh, he knows enough to ask about it.
Yeah.
He doesn't really understand the depth of like how serious.
No, not at all. But even beyond all that,
But like,
That's a big part of like his father's life.
yeah. Well, the point I'm trying to drive you, it's his dad. That's kind of part of that's his responsibility. Answer those questions. They're not always going to be easy. That's what you expect of your parents, right? They're going to answer any and everything you have about the world, right? Whatever pops into your head, that's part of the job description. So you are entitled to that to a degree. In that way, I don't know that if I would make like questions of entitlement like its own thing, but it would definitely kind of fold into this, I think, this relationship question. Okay, good. There's probably a couple more we could do, but this is good enough because what I really want to do now is get specific. These are, the way I talk about it is a bit of a menu, okay? You could pick one, in some cases two, but I'm going to go ahead and limit yourself to one, okay? You pick one and then you go back through the poem and say, all right, what lines can I look at to help me think more about this theme, this concern? Can I start building body paragraphs, specific arguments about this theme or concern? We already started doing it with choice, so I feel like we should just ride that wave if we can catch it again. What are some lines we might look at for choice? We're thinking about making choices, having choices. There's a lot in here, by the way. I just want one right now.
I'm so sorry, but I didn't say this earlier when you asked about like lines that stick out.
Okay.
The shadow of my mother thrown across it. What is that about?
Okay. Yeah, two things. All right, one. He's talking about a picture, and Fairchild is kind of famous. Like a lot of poets don't like him, and this is the reason I teach him because he's really prosy. It's written like a story, but he also writes really long sentences. And sometimes you can get kind of lost in them, in the sense of them. But what's going on? He says, the palm of his hand, meaning his father's hand, slowly tapping the arm of the lawn chair that has appeared in family photographs since 1945. So he very quickly shifts from the scene, which is dad doing this, to just the chair itself that has been in all these family pictures since 1945. That's helping signal to you. It's like, hey, we're talking about World War II, right? But then he just keeps talking about those pictures. The shadow of my mother thrown across it. Saying that like in those family pictures, he remembers, I guess, the way people were positioned, her shadow would always be thrown across the lawn chair. I know, it's kind of hard to track. The other reason he does that, just so we're fully keeping score, has anybody ever seen the pictures after the atomic bombings?
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys remember the shadows in some of those?
Yeah.
He's doing that too. I like when people have those moments. You're like, oh shit. And then all of a sudden you're like, that's pretty smart. And he's doing. Do you know what I'm talking about? Because you asked. Okay, cool. So he's also doing that. He's recalling those images. I think most of us have of the destruction of those bombs, where it would like flash fry somebody. Sorry about the verb. Flash fry somebody against a wall, and it would leave their shadow. He's doing that with his mom's shadow in the picture, which is interesting. And this is not what we're talking about because we're talking about choice. But he's recalling even that bombing imagery when it comes to his family. That's kind of wild. That feels important. But anyway, you had your hand up about choice.
Yeah, the last line, he can do nothing and neither can I.
Okay. Yes. We're going to build another menu. He can do nothing. Neither can I. I think that's pretty good. Now, I'm gonna save us some time when it comes to reading the poem, thinking about choice in this case. This would come later in your paper. There are reasons for that we will discover together. I'm just letting you know, because I know how this stuff works. We're not going to talk about this yet. But absolutely, you probably have to talk about that for reasons I believe you pointed out, if I'm not mistaken. It'd be hard to talk about choice and not talk about the line where the speaker goes, we don't have any. For sure. Let's build to that, though. Other lines. There's a handful of them in here. Yes, sir?
Like, at the beginning, he's like slowly tapping on the armchair. And like, you know how you like think about something, you get madder because you're thinking about it more?
It's definitely, like, he's definitely building, you get the sense that the father is not only struggling with the question, but like deeply unhappy about it, I guess.
Like later on, he's like beating the chair.
Yeah, it gets harder. What's that got to do with choice, though?
Like he's thinking like he didn't really have a choice.
In what?
Like going to war.
Can you prove that with these lines? Not with these.
No.
I'm gonna help you out. Not with these. I think you could argue that with a different line, though. What line could you use to is your hand up? I can't tell.
Yes.
Be proud about it. What's going on?
I know you kind of already talked about it, and I don't know for sure if it would count for choice, but when he said why we dropped the bomb, but I feel like they didn't really have like that choice. I think it was a matter of like they said like they were.
I've read the poem a lot.
That's right? That's verbatim. Yeah, I'm good at this. All right. It's not a marketable talent. Just so you. Anyway, why we dropped the bomb on those 2 towns in Japan? We got our line break here. Let's start there. You don't always have to go in chronological order in the poem, okay? What I was trying to lead you to is I can't remember. I think you pointed the line out earlier. Somebody pointed out they owed it to me, right? About the Packard. If we're trying to get to your point about not having a choice, even going so far as to say maybe he was drafted, they owed it to me, I think, would help us do work there, right? But we'll save that for a bit. Again, it's hard to talk about this poem, especially if you're thinking about choice, but I think it's hard to talk about this poem just at all and not talk about the question, right? Everything that happens in this poem happens because he asks that question. So let's think about it. When it comes to quotations, okay, and again, we've done this work a little bit, you want to do your best to focus on specific details. Oftentimes, this is language, okay? Not always, but oftentimes. In these lines, because it's technically 2, what language do you think we could focus on, we could dig into more? What seems important or significant here? I kind of gave you guys that one. That's true. We are going to talk about that here in a second. Anything else?
I don't know if this is purposeful. Well, I think everything's purposeful. That he like breaks it up.
That line break is interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have any more thoughts on it? I do agree with you.
No, I'm not that far.
Okay, that's all good. No, that's a good catch. All line breaks especially are intentional. They don't always lead to much, but he decided, the poet did, and then the speakers who we're talking about, decided to break the line there. He breaks on towns, not in Japan, right? Why? For a sec, pretend we were going to maybe try to say something about breaking the line on towns. And even just the word, towns. He chose that too. They're not towns. They're fucking cities. There's a lot of people there. You think a town, what is a town?
Small, like people compared.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we bombed some towns in Japan where we killed like 30 folks. You know. I mean, bummer for them, but like, yeah. So he says towns. Breaks on it even, which again, you could argue further sort of hones in on, focuses on towns before we ever get to a question of Japan. Why do that? Yeah.
It's a lot more innocent, like child perspective.
What do you mean? There's a couple ways that could go, what you just said.
I guess like asking town to make the doesn't seem as like big a deal as it was.
Yeah. There's a good verb for that I just lost. Anyway. Yeah, it kind of minimizes what, the damage, I suppose, in a way. Maybe. And again, it's not just saying those two towns, but breaking on it, right? Which is a good observation. Okay? What else could it do, though, to call them towns instead of cities? When you think of a town, what associations do you have with a town? When I say that word, I've said it 6 times now, I think. What do you envision about a town? How do you know when you're in a town? Houses and families. How's that different, just for the sake of argument? How's that different from a city? When you envision a city, what do you envision? You both talked at once, I didn't hear either one. You and then you.
It's like country.
The town is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more space, for sure. What'd you say?
I said cities, corporations, like big buildings.
Big buildings. You don't think as much about people. There's more people in that city. But weirdly, that's not at the top of your list of cities. So you could also argue, totally counter to this, it actually maybe minimizes the damage because the town is smaller, but in the same breath, the loss of life, right? You think of town, you think of people, families. City reads a little bit differently. Takes you more work up here to get to that same place. I would agree with that. And again, we are at no point saying the boy intentionally does this. He's a boy. He tells us, he says this mindlessly, which is what little boys do, I tell you from experience. It's what they do everything about. My 2 sons' favorite thing to do, they get their underwear and they make it ninja masks and they run around the house. What an idiotic thing to do. But so this is not like this is not coming from the boy with stain on it. I just want to make that clear, okay? But speaker tells us, breaks here. You could definitely make that argument that we're focusing in on the loss of life. Next line, in Japan, not completely dissimilar from, do they still make love? Well, to their wives, like kind of a similar operation. And now, because I think that's its own interesting line of thought we could continue. Now, we can come back to this. Why we drop those bombs. What does that imply, linguistically? Yeah.
It implies that the soldiers had a choice of whether or not the bombs were.
Not just the soldiers.
But like, everybody.
All of us. This is we. Yeah, for sure. If you've ever been in a place where people chant that, like that's what USA, bomb those fucks, like that's what that we means. That's what it means. You couldn't phrase it that way in a paper, unfortunately. But that's the idea. We're in this together, we did it, we all came together and said, Pearl Harbor was a mistake, wasn't it? And that's what that implies. And then you get to towns. It changes a little bit. There's an R word that we're dancing around here.
Responsibility.
You say it with your chest, please.
Responsibility.
Good. It implies, it suggests we are all in some way responsible for that. And again, this is the boy. He is mindless. But it's interesting that he says that. Now, conversely, I think we would very quickly have to move to the father. And of course, my note-taking system is not ideal, but maybe here's quotation 1, there's 2, and then all the way down there's 3. It's just they owed it to me, right?
I felt like they owed it to me.
Oh, he says all that? Personally, I could lose, I felt like. But anyway, okay, so they owed it to me. Here again. We're out of room. What language can we focus in on?
They.
Obviously, you get, and again, we talked about it a little bit, but now we're actually trying to do some of that work. I agree. They. There's at least 1 or 2 other pieces of language in here I think we could also talk about. Owed. That's an interesting verb. Verbs, by the way, action words. If you write well, and this guy's a very famous poet, people will read him after all of us are dead. It's a weird thought to have, but it's true. He thinks about his verbs, okay? They do a lot of work. Owed it. I agree. I think that's an important word. What other word could we maybe talk about? Me. There's 5 words, 3 of them are pretty important. I agree. Let's start at the top. They. And no, I'm like a squirrel. Like my attention is very, so that kills me. Anyway, talk to me about they. This is the father now. This is not the boy. And again, we talked about this a little bit already. What is the father implying with they?
Government.
U.S. government, which again, that's part of this. But he's cutting a big slice off of this. Right? For sure. U.S. government owed it to me. Even with that, the way that sentence is structured, what's he implying? What's he saying about the U.S. government here? To say they owed it to me.
We stick it to you.
I didn't hear either one of you, I'm sorry. You and then you.
I said that's the least they can do kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's what he's saying. Which statement?
I said that they did something to him.
Yes. Which implies what about his relationship to the U.S. government?
He doesn't like them too much.
He doesn't like them. He isn't them.
The biggest fan.
Huh?
You wouldn't be the biggest fan of it, especially after.
No, there's that as well. But at bottom, it's he is not them, right? That's important, especially considering what we just said in this magical body paragraph we just wrote. The boy is coming at it from we. The dad has a different opinion. That's important. U.S. government is they. You could argue if you wanted to go further than that. I think I said it's like almost adversarial, maybe. But because we have no room, he is not them. He is not the government. What does that say about we?
There is no me.
Good. What's that say about that R word?
He doesn't
There
take
was no
responsibility.
Let's talk about that for just a second. Now, I agree. That is absolute. He says it without saying it, right? And it kind of, in a way, you could even argue, sort of answers the question. Why did we drop the bombs? We? Bitch, I wasn't there, right? Like, there's a historical debate around this, and we're going to touch on that a little bit, but that's not what we're mostly interested in the poem itself. We're looking at 2 characters dealing with this personal drama, okay? But just hash it out for a second. Why do you think the dad says they? Doesn't feel personally responsible for the bombs? Why do you think so?
He didn't personally drop the bomb.
He didn't pull the trigger.
He didn't give the okay for them to do it in the first place.
Nobody asked him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who makes those decisions?
Politicians.
You're a politician, very, very high up the chain, but like a small sort of, there's just a room of people. And this is back in the 40s, so like a room of white guys, right? Like that It's a little different now, not super, but a little bit, but different conversation. The point is, very small collection of people who are Americans and were elected. And in that way you could say, well, you know, maybe we do have some responsibility, we elected those people. To that I would wonder, how many times do you think when they were giving their speeches, right, at these rallies that you see, were they ever like, and we will bomb the fuck out of those people? Like, I just don't think that was part of the election campaign. So these people do get elected, but once they're in, your say in the matter is over for 4 years. You get to re-up, but then it's over again. Like, so this question of we and they, it's not just about choice. It is that. And I kind of think I'm on the dad's side here, because I don't think you have much. What else are we talking about, though? It's not just choice all of a sudden. If we're talking about who decides to do things like this, what other big theme or concern are we dealing with all of a sudden?
Like, what's right and wrong?
No. Everybody's got different morals. Especially if you were in the 40s and you were an American and they did sneak attack Pearl Harbor. That's a different headspace from 2022. It just is. It just is. You would feel differently. You feel differently again if you were of Japanese descent and having to deal with that shit. You'd feel very differently. So we're not talking about morality. We're not doing that. We're talking about who gets to choose and who doesn't. What are we talking about?
Power.
Power. Oh, that came from everybody. That's very good. Yeah. So I would add, if you get to make choices, you have some power. Even if it's only choices for you. That's power over yourself. Okay? If people are choosing for you, like I do with my boys, it doesn't sound like he has very much power at all, does he? Yeah. Nor should they, by the way. They're crazy people. But the dad, they owed it to me. I'm not them. I didn't do that. But that also says he didn't have the power to be involved in that decision. What decisions does the dad make in this poem? I think it's a shorter poem. It's not like we see their whole lives. Okay. What does he choose? He chooses the Packard. Anything else?
Silence.
That's interesting. Yeah, you caught yourself, because I'm like, well, how would you answer that question? If a 5-year-old, your progeny, who I assume you don't have any, I'm trying to pry, but they're like, hey, Dad, why did we kill all those people? How do you answer that? I don't know. We get questions like that sometimes. It's hard. Because not only do you have to deal with how do you answer that question to anybody, but also, how do I not destroy this tiny person's mind, right? Like, you gotta. So, the dad is kind of in an impossible situation. And I think that's what the speaker is realizing later. Now. Right? Because we're years later, keep in mind. We're not the little boy. We're years down the line. He's an adult. He's looking back and going, I put my dad in like a no-win situation on that day, right? What could he have said? Well, if you're in a no-win situation, how much power do you have? I would argue none, or very little. So he chooses the Packard for himself. He does do that. Doesn't choose to bomb Japan. You could argue, at the very least, he doesn't choose to go to Tinian, Saipan, and Okinawa, even if he volunteered, which we make that jury is out. We cannot answer that question in this poem. He might have been drafted. He might have signed up, because plenty of people did that too. Okay, but once you sign up, how much power do you have? No, very little. You're going to Saipan. Where's that? Doesn't matter. You don't need to know that. Yeah. So there's a lot of that going on with the dad and his lived experience, a lot of not choosing, a lot of powerlessness. Which brings me to that last line. And I've erased it now because we ran out of space. But he can do nothing and neither can I. Pretend I wrote it and we'll just kind of talk about it. I'll get a little bit uncomfortably close to you and I apologize. What's that about? He can do nothing and neither can I. That's the father, is the he. I is the boy, but of course older now. What is he talking about there? He can do nothing and neither can I. That's referencing something, you know? He can do nothing about something and neither can I, is kind of how you could read that.
About what happened?
What do you mean?
Like with the bombing? Is it kind of like a...
It could be. Let's play this game for a minute. It could be he can do nothing about the bombing for reasons that we've already covered, and you're damn sure the little boy couldn't. Okay, sure. What else? We got a couple options here. I want to see what else can neither one of them do anything about. To hear the speaker tell it.
They talk about the sun a lot. Does that have anything to do with
Let's talk about this real quick. You had a question. I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Does that have anything to do with anything?
Well, it's in the poem, so yeah. On the one hand, because we start the poem talking about the sun too, you'll notice.
Mm-hmm.
It's likely that the speaker is having a little bit of fun with the sun. You know what I mean? He's a little boy, so we're doing like a double thing there. Like, oh, I'm so smart. The sun. Okay, there's that. There is that. However, think about this imagery. Do we all know what imagery is? Sweet. Think about this imagery at the end. Once we get past the chair, the garage floor, his eyes, meaning the father, watching the sun in its evening burial. What is that?
Sun is setting.
It's sunset. What a dark motherfucker. It's evening burial. That's how we describe it? What's up?
Why?
Yeah.
Its poem's called Little Boy.
Yeah.
And Little Boy was the name of one of the bombs dropped.
It was. You're very smart.
Thanks.
That's a good catch. We rarely have time to talk about it in class, so I don't even point it out. But yeah,
Okay.
one of the bombs, the first one, was called Little Boy. The second one was called Fat Man because it was bigger. They had senses of humor back then. That feels intentional, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. All of a sudden, the little boy in the poem is basically explicitly being compared to one of the atomic bombs. Something going on there. Good catch. All right. But anyway, we gotta get back on track. That was very good. Evening burial. We all agree. Dark? Pretty dark? Okay. And the spreading silver light, that sounds nice. And then darkness over the farm. Okay. And vast flat fields. So sunset basically is the world dying. We all knew that kid in high school. I was that kid in high school. I can say that. I got black hoodies in my closet. So darkness over the farms and vast flat fields, which I will grow so tired of, so weary of years later, that I will leave. Watching then as I do now. So he watched it then, he watches it now. His eyes, meaning his father, as they take in the falling rag of the sun. What are we describing there? Falling rag of the sun? What's a falling rag? We all follow that. It's just a rag that like fell from somewhere. Okay, and it kind of, if you could stop it midair, it'd be kind of like floaty and weirdly shapen. Falling rag of the sun. What is that? It's still sunset. We're just still talking about. You know how you look at it, you're like, that's really pretty. Falling rag. It's a falling rag. A level stare. A gaze that asks nothing and gives nothing. The sun burning itself to ashes constantly. Anybody got a read on that? Cool. Here's a fun bit of astronomy. The sun, I'm a nerd, the sun has about 1 billion years left, give or take. After that point, it will die and explode and swallow the earth. And then it will shrink back to next to nothing comparatively. And that'll be the end of our solar system.
That just means
Nothing for us.
Oh.
And not if we're on Earth. Anyway, The sun, literally, that's how stars work. They eat themselves. They burn themselves up over billions and billions of years. But the sun burning itself to ashes constantly. The orange maize, corn, the orange maize blackening in drought and waste, so the fields are dying, and he can do nothing and neither can I. What kind of imagery is this at the end? Evening burial, falling rag of the sun, star death, drought, waste. What is that? It's all,
Kind of just like apocalyptic.
it's apocalyptic, for sure. For sure.
Is he like referencing that word?
You got it.
To like the damages of war, like after war?
It sounds a little bit like what's just happened. Like a bomb is going on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's unintentional. I don't. But it's also like the sun burning itself to ashes constantly, because the sun is a nuclear furnace. It works kind of like an atomic bomb works. But that's just a thing out there. I guess I'll ask the $1 million question. Who gets to choose when and how the sun explodes? Nobody. President got nothing to do with that, right? You vote all you want. There's no. He can do nothing and neither can I. About the sun, about the fields, about bombs, because we kind of have that imagery. About the apocalypse, because that's absolutely like this just super dark, last 10 lines, whatever it is. You didn't choose any of that. He chose the Packard. And that was it. But to phrase it like he does here at the end, now we're not just talking about ideas that, at least generally, it seems like you guys are on board with, like, Dad didn't choose the war, didn't choose the bond, like, we get that stuff, right? Once you sign up, your choice is over, they choose for you. We zoom out here. We go cosmic in our scope, right? What are we saying about choice with that last line, do you think, given the context? He can do nothing and neither can I.
Like in the grand scheme of things, we really don't have that much of a choice.
Which is to say we don't have much what?
Power.
Yeah, I think so. And what's interesting about that, with the very little time that we have, and it kills me. And I know you wouldn't stay. We could talk about this for another hour. How does the boy arrive at this opinion? Or this mindset? I mean, especially if you go back and look at it, I'm ballparking. 12? Is it last 12 lines? Something like that. Totally. Huge difference in those last lines versus the rest of the poem. Dramatic shifts. And it's right around the time the speaker tells us, by the way, I'm not still the little boy, I'm older now. How does that shift occur? Like what brings that out in this guy? What?
Reality.
Okay. I like how somebody over here said rage, but then over here we had life and reality. I was like, what do you guys mean by that? Like, if you don't mind me pushing on it a little bit.
I mean, life kind of kicks you in the ass.
He became older like how his dad is.
Ah,
He probably fought in the Korean War.
that's a leap. That's a huge leap. We don't know. We don't know that. I'm saying we don't. All we know, all we can prove is he's older, like his father was. Okay.
I'm more jaded.
That'd be a way to put it, for sure. But all we know in the poem is it comes with age. That's all we know. He's gotten older, and whatever comes with that age, at least for the speaker, seems to bring with it this sort of jaded perspective, what have you. Okay. Why do you think he's like that, the speaker?
He says in a line, which I will grow weary of.
Meaning the fields and the life and all it represents. Yeah.
That he probably grew tired and old.
God knows you do. Yeah. You do. You do. You guys don't know it yet. You don't. I always feel like the Grim Reaper when I talk like this to my classes, but it comes for us all. You think you're tired now. You don't know. You don't. You really don't. Let's go all the way back to the beginning real quick. How does the boy ask that question? What's the word he uses? Mindlessly. He said mindlessly. What other words could we substitute for mindlessly? Not thinking. Doesn't it sound like he's capable of thinking? Mindless. Huh? Thoughtless? Yeah, for sure, for sure. And you get the impression, I think, that that's how he does everything, right? As a little boy. Why? Any little person. Why? You've had some contact with them, I assume. You've seen them out in the wild.
They usually don't know any better.
They don't know any better. Okay. So that is that to say, and I'm sure you've never encountered this, but say you have a friend and you've thought on more than one occasion, that guy is the most childish person I've ever met. Why? Why do you have that thought? Why is it an insult to call a person that would be around your age childish?
They don't know shit about life.
They should know better, to kind of borrow your phrasing. What is that? How do you know? How do you know these things that you know now? Like if you could talk to your 6-year-old self and be like, hey man, you want to stop peeing in the yard or whatever. My boys are crazy. Anyway, how do you know not to do those things?
Experiencing that it didn't work out too good.
Well, that you learn and you gain experience just living. Just, again, however old you are right now, think 10 years previous and all the wild things you've learned that now seem obvious. But they're only obvious because you lived through them. And you occasionally ran into an adult who was like, hey man, you can't do that. And then you said, why? Because you have no reason to know. We're talking about innocence versus experience here. Another item on our menu, and it could factor into any and all of these probably. So for instance, the father, first half of the poem, much more experienced than the son, that's why he asks. But you could also argue, this is a question born of innocence, not knowing anything. All it means to be innocent is you're not involved, you have no idea. Experience, that gets you that answer. Innocence is we're all in this together, right? No, you idiot, they. Experience. I didn't choose this. What are you talking about? That's experience. It's getting older. It might be jaded. But you think about, because we know a little bit more about the father's life, 1945, he absolutely served, and he absolutely saw some wild shit, okay, in the Pacific Theater. Like, yeah. That's what life taught him. That's what his experiences taught him about the world and how it works. So you say jaded, it's for the dad, it's reality. You know? What else is part of his reality? What else we don't know from the father, we couldn't argue that, but what has the speaker learned? He's learned this now in his years, his age. What has he learned? We've said it already. And I know it sounds like I'm asking you a big question, I promise I'm not. What has he learned?
Life kind of sucks.
We can get more specific. What has he learned?
You don't have any choice.
He's learned that. He's learned that. As an adult, you have very little power. I'm here right now because they pay me. Because I want my kids to have a house. And food and stuff. You guys seem nice. But in a way, I'm not exactly choosing to be here. You see what I'm saying? Like, after this, I got other shit I gotta do. I not a lot of choice. Not a lot of power. There's just not. He's learned that. There's a thesis in there somewhere. Okay. What we just did again, very quickly on the board, best we could. We started global, and we kind of added to it as we went. That can happen, okay? And we just picked one out that you guys had some momentum with to begin with. And I was like, all right, well, now go find some lines that deal with that specifically. And we ended up talking about 3. Again, very quickly. But this is the birth of a body paragraph, I think. This is probably the birth of another one. This is probably the birth of another one. All your papers, that's how you build them. Okay? And I know we're pretty much out of time. I got one more thing I got to tell you in that regard. Can I erase this? Sweet. Body paragraphs, which I think are due next time. As I said, what we just laid out on the board are kind of like the germs of those, but I can also give you a format for body paragraph construction. I was taught the 3 I's. Some of you may be familiar with this. Other people use a thing called the meal plan, which uses 4. So, but they all work the same. They just have different names, okay? And they're built like this. What time is it, by the way?
12:09.
Good God. All right. Add one more for you guys. All right. Identify, illustrate, interpret. Now, if it helps you, and it did me, so it must work for somebody. If it helps you to think about this with these 3 names, go for it. But what really matters is what these names pertain to, okay? They are these. Start with the topic sentence, which we'll cover more next time. You move to your evidence, which we have talked about in every class. And then you get to your analysis, which is what we very much focused on today. Now, how do these work? Your topic sentence is an argument because it's the main idea of your body paragraph. And ideally, every body paragraph is making some kind of an argument about the text, okay? Now, what I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to say this a lot this semester, you were all taught to write in a very specific way. And there are reasons you were taught that. The problem is that is only applicable to in-class essays, ever. So in some ways, it's not helpful. It's really good for tests. You know those things you take when you're 30? Exactly, you don't. It's kind of a useless skill. But, here's what I'm going to tell you. The way I approach teaching papers, right, and the way we've done it in class thus far, start with the poem. You may have some big ideas. You may have some notions. Like, I think this poem is about father-son relationships, you know, just to borrow one we didn't really talk about. I don't know what it has to say about father-son, but then you go find a line or 2. Go find something specific from the poem. That's your evidence. Start with evidence. Start with the poem. Okay? All the talking we did about a line or 2 when we had it, that was our analysis. If you do that enough, if you stay in analysis enough, 2 things are going to happen. Number 1, you're going to make some mistakes. You want to try to weed those out? You figure that out as you go. But number 2, more importantly, if you do this enough, you will make an argument. We ended this class by saying adulthood is basically accepting that you have no power. That's an argument. It's a bummer. It's an argument. And we got there by following the lines, by investigating language, and just seeing where it took us. Start with evidence. Bury yourself in analysis. And eventually, you will come to an argument that you can then sum up in a topic sentence. That's how you build body paragraphs. Okay? And I could be totally wrong. Is that your homework for next time? Yeah. Sweet. All right. For next time, body paragraphs. And also, body and soul, right? You don't know. There's a poem. Go look it up. It's on the syllabus. Thank you.